Have you ever seen the world so clearly that it frightened you? That strange feeling when you notice patterns others ignore, when truth burns brighter than comfort ever allows. That was the curse and the genius of Niccolò Machiavelli. He didn't just study power, he saw it. Beneath the velvet of kings and the prayers of priests, he saw the machinery turning, the gears grinding men into myths. And for that vision, he was both remembered and reviled. Most people want the world to make sense in gentle ways. They want morality to win, good intentions to rise, and honesty to be rewarded. But Machiavelli dared to whisper, it doesn't work that way. He lived in Florence, a city of marble and betrayal, a place where art flourished, but daggers hid behind every compliment. It was the age of the Medici, where beauty and power shared the same smile. In that chaos, Machiavelli was a diplomat. He saw kingdoms rise and crumble, not because of righteousness, but because of strategy. And he began to write what he had learned from the shadows. What emerged was The Prince, a book that would shake the world. It wasn't a sermon. It was a mirror reflecting the truth so honestly that even today it still makes people uncomfortable. He wrote that leaders must learn not to be good, but appear good. That love is, he once wrote, the wise man does at once what the fool does finally. That was not arrogance, it was agony. Because he knew that wisdom often comes with loneliness. When you see too much, you stop belonging. You speak truths that make others defensive. You threaten the balance built on ignorance. History painted him as evil, the father of deceit, the teacher of tyrants. But that is only half the story. Because Machiavelli didn't glorify manipulation, he revealed it. He was holding up a lantern showing how power truly moved behind closed doors. He was telling future generations, understand it or be consumed by it, and yet his name became synonymous with cunning and cruelty. That's the paradox of vision. Those who see too far ahead are often punished by those still blinded by the present. They are called heretics until time catches up to them. Machiavelli was a prophet of reality. He taught that ideals without structure collapse like castles in air, and that to build a world that lasts, one must first understand human nature as it truly is. He knew that men are driven not by what is noble, but by what is necessary. That virtue fades in the face of hunger, ambition, and fear, and that morality must sometimes bend to protect the greater order. His writings were not evil, they were warnings. Warnings for those too naive to think power obeys goodness. Warnings that kings fall, not because they are bad, but because they are unprepared. Yet, imagine his loneliness. To see so clearly, yet be misunderstood by every generation that followed. To know that truth, stripped of beauty, often feels like cruelty. He once said, there is no avoiding war, it can only be postponed to the advantage of others. That line carries the weight of a man who had seen diplomacy fail and power devour peace. He didn't justify cruelty, he explained why it happens. And perhaps that is the greatest danger of seeing what others don't. You begin to understand that humanity walks on a nice edge, balancing ideals with instincts, love with control, compassion with survival. Machiavelli stood in that thin space between vision and damnation. He saw leaders not as villains, but as fragile men steering storms, and he taught that pretending the storm doesn't exist won't make it disappear. His tragedy was timeless, the seer punished for sight. He was too pragmatic for the moralists, too moral for the opportunists. He belonged nowhere except in truth. When The Prince spread across Europe, it horrified scholars and delighted rulers. Some read it as a manual for manipulation, others as a confession of politics' true nature. But Machiavelli never said power was good, only that it was real. And that's what people couldn't handle, because once you see reality unfiltered, it never looks beautiful again. It looks honest. He wrote, "It is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both," a line so misunderstood that it became a curse upon his name. But what he meant was simple. Love is a choice, fear is a fact. Love depends on the hearts of others, and hearts are fragile, fickle, and fleeting. Fear though dark, is stable. It obeys logic, and in a world of wolves, the lamb who believes only in kindness will not last long. He wasn't teaching cruelty, he was teaching realism. Yet he hoped the wise could balance both the iron and the velvet, because true leadership requires strength without losing soul. There's a haunting wisdom in his exile years. Clarity is a double-edged sword. It grants sight, but it takes peace. And once you see the world as it truly is, you can never close your eyes again. Machiavelli knew that truth better than anyone. He saw politics not as a theater of honor, but as a battlefield of survival. Every smile hid a motive, every handshake concealed a calculation. He learned that truth was never neutral. It either empowers or destroys, because in every kingdom, truth threatens someone's illusion. And those who live off illusion will always hunt the truth-teller. That's why he was feared, not because he lied, but because he refused to. He stripped the mask off human nature and showed the face beneath, and once people saw it, they could never unsee it. But imagine the loneliness that follows such sight. When every conversation feels like a performance, every promise like a move on a chessboard. To see clearly is to stand apart. He once wrote, "The great majority of mankind are satisfied with appearances, as though they were realities. That line isn't judgment, it's grief." Because deep down, he wished it weren't true. Machiavelli's greatest pain was not exile, it was silence. The quiet proof that most people prefer comfort over understanding. He had offered truth, but the world wanted reassurance. And yet, that's the eternal dance between vision and acceptance. Those who bring light are often accused of spreading fire, because illumination burns before it heals. Clarity doesn't just reveal others, it exposes you. It forces you to confront your own contradictions, to admit that you too are capable of the flaws you condemn. That's why wisdom always carries sorrow. Because to understand people deeply is to forgive them constantly, and forgiveness, no matter how noble, is exhausting. But Machiavelli never turned bitter. In his letters, you still hear hope, a quiet belief that mankind could learn if it dared to look honestly. He wasn't preaching darkness, he was begging us to wake up. He said, "Fortune is a woman, and it is necessary, if you wish to master her, to conquer her by force, not as cruelty, but as metaphor." He meant that life does not surrender to passivity, it demands action, courage, and timing. The tragedy is that the world remembered only the hardness of his words, not the humanity behind them. We made him a villain because it's easier than accepting that he was right. We called him ruthless to hide our own cowardice. But look closer and you'll find the heart of a humanist. A man who loved his country enough to speak truth, even when it cost him everything. A man who believed that dangerous knowledge was still better than comfortable blindness. That's the weight of clarity. It doesn't let you rest. It whispers in your mind when others sleep peacefully in ignorance. It keeps you awake because you can't unsee what you know. Machiavelli's insight was not just political, it was spiritual. He taught that every person rules a kingdom, their own mind. And within it, the same war rages between principle and desire, virtue and ambition. When you read The Prince today, you're not reading a guide for kings. You're reading a mirror for yourself, because every decision, every compromise is its own act of politics. The office, the relationship, the classroom, all are courts of power. And in each, we wear our own masks, play our own roles, fight our own silent wars. That's why Machiavelli remains timeless. He wasn't writing about rulers, he was writing about us. He knew that power reveals character more than it corrupts it. That every human, given authority, faces the same test. Do you serve truth or do you serve yourself? He warned that people follow appearances more than substance. That we build idols from images and destroy prophets for honesty. And if that isn't still true today, scroll through social media and see for yourself. The danger of seeing what others don't isn't just isolation, it's disbelief. No one believes you until the fire reaches their own doorstep, and by then, it's too late. Machiavelli died misunderstood but not defeated. His ideas outlived the men who exiled him. His words became the quiet teacher of every generation that dared to question power. Even centuries later, his name still divides rooms. Because truth always does. It makes the comfortable uneasy and the awake uncomfortable. He became a symbol not of deceit but of perception. Because to see the world as it is means walking through it unshielded. You feel everything sharper, the lies, the motives, the fear behind every smile. But maybe that's not a curse. Maybe that's the beginning of freedom. Because freedom begins the moment illusion ends. Machiavelli didn't want us to be cold. He wanted us to be conscious. To act with intelligence, not innocence. To understand that morality without awareness is powerless. And isn't that what we still struggle with today? We crave justice but ignore consequence. We love honesty until it turns toward us. See, that's what Machiavelli truly wanted, to awaken architects of destiny, not victims of circumstance. He believed that knowledge, when coupled with courage, could rebuild nations. And he trusted that someday people would understand his heart beneath the armor of his words. He wrote not for the rulers of his time, but for the thinkers of the future. For those who would walk between light and shadow and not lose themselves. For those who could see without despairing. Because clarity without compassion becomes cruelty. But compassion without clarity becomes chaos. The art of life, he taught, lies in balancing both. And that is why his lessons endure. Because they don't glorify manipulation, they reveal the anatomy of human nature. They remind us that to govern others, we must first govern ourselves. So when you feel the loneliness of seeing too much, when others laugh at truths you can't unhear, remember Machiavelli sitting under the Tuscan night, writing to a future that didn't yet exist. He wrote for those who would one day understand that truth is not the enemy of goodness. There's a quiet curse that follows every visionary, a silence that separates what they see from what the world believes, a distance carved not by arrogance, but by understanding too deep for comfort. It doesn't come with thunder or war or glory. It arrives quietly, in moments when truth pierces illusion, when clarity becomes heavier than ignorance. And in that silence, vision becomes both a gift and a burden, a light that guides forward but isolates from the crowd lost in shadow. Machiavelli lived within that distance, a thinker who saw the machinery of power long before others even heard it turning, watching kingdoms rise and fall by laws few dared to acknowledge. His clarity became his lonely crown, forged not of gold but of truth, too raw for comfort, and the world mistook his wisdom for cruelty because it revealed what they wished to hide. To him, seeing was survival, and understanding was strength, but the price was solitude, for few can stand beside the man who sees too much. Centuries later, that same crown rests upon new heads, no longer princes or philosophers, but dreamers, builders, and disruptors who sense the tremors before the fall. They are the entrepreneurs who find opportunity in chaos, the scientists who question sacred data, the artists who create emotions the world is not ready to feel. Each carries the burden of foresight, walking roads unseen, for visionaries walk ahead of their time, and no crowd follows a path they cannot yet recognize. Society loves its prophets only after they're gone, building statues for the madmen they once mocked, and quoting the very voices they once silenced in fear. For the truth is simple, we do not despise difference. We despise the reflection that exposes our own stagnation, our fear of becoming more. We punish those who awaken us because sleep feels safer than sight, and illusion is easier to worship than reality. Machiavelli understood the oldest weapon in power was not the sword but perception, for whoever shapes what people see controls what they believe and, through belief, commands their world. Today that war is fought not in palaces but on screens, in headlines, in algorithms whispering comfort dressed as truth, guiding eyes while blinding minds. Yet few dare to look behind the curtain because clarity is costly. It demands courage, independence, and the willingness to be misunderstood. Those who do look pay the price of awakening, speaking truths that scorch illusions, and are called arrogant, rebellious, even insane by those still asleep. But every revolution begins with one who refuses blindness, one who sees the cracks before collapse and steps forward while others freeze in doubt. That is the danger and destiny of vision. It burns bridges to ignorance, leaving behind only the road of truth, narrow, lonely but free. Once you recognize manipulation, you cannot return to naivety. Once you taste truth, illusions turn bitter. Once you awaken, the crowd no longer feels like home. Machiavelli's spirit walks among those who question, who challenge, who refuse to accept appearances as reality. Every journalist who confronts power, every student who rejects tradition, every thinker who sees beyond the veil carries his legacy in silence. They walk the same path he once did, admired by a few, misunderstood by most, because seeing deeply means living differently, and clarity is a language few wish to learn. Yet the lonely crown of vision is not punishment but initiation, the moment one crosses from comfort into awareness. Machiavelli's exile was not his downfall, it was his awakening, for only in distance did his vision sharpen and truth speak louder than flattery. He learned that solitude refines wisdom, that isolation is not the enemy of greatness but the forge where strength is born. When the noise fades, clarity begins, and in silence, truth finally steps forward. That is why the greatest thinkers often seem detached, not because they feel less, but because they feel more, having seen too much of the machinery behind the illusion. To see what others don't is to hold fire in your hands. It lights your path but scorches your palms, and yet you keep walking because darkness is worse. The visionary bears the pain of sight, knowing comfort lies in blindness, but freedom lives in truth. Machiavelli's heirs wear suits, not robes. They sit in boardrooms, laboratories, classrooms, watching a world that celebrates simplicity and crucifies truth for being complex. They persist, not for praise but for purpose, for they know vision is not a privilege, it is a duty, a torch passed through time. The world cannot evolve without those willing to see beyond illusion, to question, to awaken even when it hurts. And perhaps that is the quiet heroism of vision, not in glory or applause, but in endurance, in continuing to see even when the world wishes you blind. For clarity is freedom, and to understand the world as it is means never again being controlled by what it pretends to be. The lonely crown is heavy, but it is the weight of truth, and truth, though isolating, is the only path to legacy. So if you ever feel the sting of being different, if your thoughts move faster than the world around you, do not curse the distance, wear it with grace. You carry the same invisible crown Machiavelli once bore, the mark of the clear-eyed, the awakeners, the architects of understanding. And though the world may not see it now, time will, for vision always walks alone before it is followed. Because this is the destiny of those who see what others don't, to walk alone today, so that others